Hey, welcome to another Mixed Media Monday. I'm Eric Scott, and I'm back to do some mixed media. Today, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I've been kind of thinking about this for a while, and I finally like, oh, let me sit down and actually do it. So here's the thing is that I know a lot of folks get really caught up in materials, and I get asked all the time, like, what are my favorite materials? What kind of paper do I use? What kind of paint? What kind of this and that? And I think a lot of times those questions can really be a way to kind of keep ourselves from creating. We feel like, oh, I'll be really creative and I'll be, really artistic. Like once I get those really high quality paints or the best markers or this or that. And I think a lot of folks stop themselves from making and creating because they feel like, I just don't have the materials. I don't have the best stuff. And I wanted to kind of sit down and take a look at what a lot of folks would consider like kids art materials because they're rather inexpensive. They're not the highest quality. In other words, they're probably not light fast. So we probably don't want to make artwork that's going to be hung up and exposed to a lot of light. But just for exploring our creativity, just for trying things out, just for experimenting, it's actually they're very awesome to use. And actually, I'm going to use all Crayola materials today because number one, they are readily available. You can find them in lots of art stores, but you can also find them in a lot of office supply stores. And especially around back to school time, you can find like really awesome deals on them. So if you're like feeling like, oh, I have to have, this $50 set of watercolor paints and I have to have the best, like the Inktense pencils that I really love. They are some of the most expensive. They're a very high quality, professional quality, but you can get just as amazing results using things like Crayola. So I wanted to just kind of show you, like, it's not so much the materials. Yeah, sometimes there is a big difference between the quality and like, the colors in the premium sets are probably going to be brighter, going to be more vivid. There's not, there's just more pigment in those things. But you'd be surprised at what you can do with a quote unquote kids material. So I just want to encourage folks, like, use what you have. And if you're waiting around to save up money to go and buy like a really good set of stuff, I think sometimes that can really um that can really get you stuck, because the other thing is that we become attached, right? Because the more expensive something is, the more it costs us, the bigger, the greater value we put onto it. And so we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, like, oh, I'm going to save these paints for something special. And it's like we don't give ourselves the permission to really play and experiment, whereas the less expensive stuff could really, because we're like, I didn't spend a lot on this. But then also thinking about, like, when I grew up, I couldn't afford any like really high quality materials. So I just bought whatever I could with the little bit of money I had. And it had to be like, the lower quality, the things that were readily available. And so that's something to think about too, is that you don't need to have the most expensive stuff. You don't need to have the highest quality of things to get started and to make and be creative. Just use what you have, or go out and buy certain things that are less expensive than these really high quality, high cost materials. And you can get, like I said, oftentimes you can get just as good of results. So anyway, let me go ahead and switch it over, and let me show you what you can do with these things. All right, so I have my normal mixed media paper. This is that Strathmore paper, very inexpensive. That's another thing I like about Strathmore. It's high quality, but it's not expensive. So, but I have Crayola. I have the Education Watercolors. They're a little bit harder to find. You might not be able to find them in a store. Sometimes you can, but I order most of my stuff online, and I think like from Blick Art Materials that this was something like, oh, I don't know, $7, $8 for a set of 16. And I've been using these every day. I've been doing a daily painting, and I just use these because they are very bright. You can just see from them that they're very bright, uh, and they work pretty well. And like I said, they're not the highest quality. They're not light fast, but for experimenting, for playing, for learning, for doing, they're going to be great. I have watercolor pencils, and I got a small set, and I forget how much these are, but they're not super expensive. It's Crayola after all. Probably a little bit harder to find them in a store, but again, order them online. I've got a few Crayola markers, and these are the washable kind, but any kind of marker, like Crayola marker, will work. And what's great about the markers is that if it's around back to school time, then you can find like a pack of 10 markers for like 99 cents. So, but we can do some really interesting things with that. And then just in case, I don't know if I'll use them, I have a pack of colored pencils. And again, it's not super expensive. So I'd probably thinking about all these materials that I have, it's probably like $20-$30 at the most, but you can use them. I mean, I've done 40 some morning paintings with just the paint. So it's like, it's going to last you a while. So I'm just going to kind of do my thing with this big paper, and I'm just going to play around with these materials just to kind of show you. Now, what I find with the more inexpensive paints is oftentimes you want to what's known as like priming them. So if you have a color that you really want to use, so if I'm going to use this turquoise color, I can put a little bit of water in it and be like, okay, let me just let that sit for a moment. Let me rinse out my brush. Maybe I want to use this light blue that's next to it. Actually, I guess this is the turquoise. This is the blue-green. So anyway, what happens is that water starts to soak into the paint. I don't do that very often because usually what I do is I just kind of mix up the paint. But, just like I've done so many times before, I'm just going to kind of scrub this down. I mean, it's pretty bright. It's pretty on par with the other paints that I've used. I do find that they're not quite as like intense. Like it's not, I mean, they're bright, which that's what intensity means, but it's not like if I swirl my brush in the paint for a while, I get more paint on it. And that's about as bright as it's going to get, like bright and dark. So anyway, but it's still, I mean, when I started using these, because I haven't used these in a long time, but I bought a set so I could do this, but then also I just wanted something inexpensive to do these daily paintings, and they're not meant to hang on the wall, but I just wanted something a little bit different. I mean, that's pretty bright. I mean, I think it's looking pretty good. But yeah, the daily paint, I just wanted something that I could just quickly do these daily paintings that was bright, that was not very expensive. Like I said, I think sometimes with the cheaper stuff, the inexpensive things, that we're more prone to just play with them and experiment and try different things, and we don't get so caught up in like the preciousness of them. All right, let me go ahead and dry this off. And like all watercolor, it gets a little bit lighter whenever it dries. I will say that the paint's not quite as smooth as like once it dries. You could see it you probably can't see it in the video, but I can see that there's a slight texture to it, and it's not really the texture of the paper, it's the paint. There's, because it's a lower quality, but it's still pretty darn bright. Also, like all watercolor, this is not waterproof. So when I do anything on top of it, it's going to lift up a little bit of what's underneath. But you know, that happens. Even with the Derwent, which are not technically watercolors, the Derwent Inktense paints, it does that a little bit as well. So like I do a lot, I want to go ahead and actually, I was just thinking like, oh, let me go ahead and do more watercolor on it. So I'm going to take some of this. Actually, I'll take a darker blue, which is up here out of frame, and I'll do some splattering. So, I mean, you could do all the same techniques. I'm just going to let that sit for a moment. And then I'm really kind of just wiping off a lot of water from my brush, so there's not a lot. And I'm just going to drag the paintbrush through, just get some streaks. And hit that up with the hairdryer. Okay, so let's go ahead and the watercolor pencils. So I bought packs of 12, and this is from a local art center that I manage, but it's, you know, it's got all your basic colors in it, and they'll do well. I'm going to go ahead and use just, this is a blue, and it's got a big paintbrush on it. So if you have regular colored pencils, they're easy to mix up, but you know, it does say watercolor and has a big brush on it. But let me go ahead and sharpen this. And just like I can with anything else, I can just color it down. The pencils are a little bit harder, but if I press down pretty hard, I can get a nice dark value. And then just, you know, just like I do always, I'm just going to take some water. Now, when I use this and I go over top of the watercolor paint, it can lift up some of the paint. So I'm going to try to be careful not to like really scrub too much with the paintbrush. But you might be able to see kind of how it's gotten a little bit lighter in some of those areas where I've painted over it, because I'm lifting up what's underneath. And I will say that it probably lifts up more than a higher quality paint. So it's like, you know, like, especially when I'm using the Derwent. The Derwent is supposed to be more permanent. So I mean, it lifts up a little bit, but you know, it's meant to be. It's one of the reasons I use it. But if I use another watercolor paint that's, you know, a higher quality, it doesn't lift up quite as much, but it'll still lift up. So I don't know if you can really see how it kind of got a little bit lighter and things kind of really blended together, you know, around where I put the watercolor paint, but, you know, or watercolor pencil, but, you know, it's part of the process. Is this, you know, it's one of the reasons I like using the layering watercolor and the watercolor pencil, is that it's a little bit unpredictable. So I have to be like a little bit more, a little bit more unattached from the my artwork, you know, because things aren't going to go exactly as planned. Let's go ahead and hit this with some with a hair dryer. So with this, I probably wouldn't build up a whole lot of layers like I might do with some other paints, but you know, it's still really interesting looking. A little bit more faded around here, where the water kind of made things bleed together. I talked about having the markers, and the markers are really interesting. These, like I said, these are the washable, but even the regular markers, the non-washable ones, but they're still water-based, so they still bleed. Can be really interesting. So this is a teal, so it's going to be very similar to that blue green. But the nice thing with the marker is that it's got this like really dark ink in it. So I'm just putting some of this down, and I'm not coloring really hard with it. I'm not putting it down in very solid, just using some lines. And I'm just going to take the paintbrush. So the marker is water based, it's water soluble, and so I can brush over it. Now I might not be able to get rid of all of the lines that I did, and that's going to kind of create some interesting texture. So this is a way to get some of that like really deep, rich color, is to use the markers. So I don't use any other kind of like water soluble markers. I mean, they do make, I know Faber-Castell, I think it is, has an entire line of watercolor markers. And, you know, you use them like this, you color them down, you paint water on them. You know, these markers are not technically watercolor markers, they're water soluble markers, but you know, you can use them in paint. And I love that texture. And even if the paper's wet, I can go back in and draw in it if I want to. But you know, kind of really getting some interesting things that are happening here with the paint, with the watercolor pencil, and with the water soluble marker. And it's all just Crayola. It didn't really cost much. And if I wanted to, I could come back with the colored pencil. Let's go ahead and do that. Let me go ahead and try this. And again, if you get the if you wait till around back to school time, I mean, you can get these for very cheap, not quite 99 cents. I mean, the 99 cents is like, you can get, the last time I did that was just a 10 pack of their classic colors and a 10 pack of the bright and bold, like the real bright. So it was 20 markers for $2. And I think the colored pencils were like 2 something or 3 something. And I just like went to a store and got them on sale back to school time. All right, so there's that blue. Let's go ahead. I know there's another couple of different kind of blues. There's a light blue, green. So, you know, trying to stay with some of the colors that I have. Let's go ahead and, there's a dark indigo. Purple. There's a light blue. I don't think they have an indigo. I think I have a bigger pack that has some of them, but you know, 24 colors is pretty good. So just like I've done many times before, I can just use the pencil and the pencil is harder than the colored pencils that I have, the either I usually use the Derwent Color Soft pencils, which is a wax-based pencil. They're very soft, very blendable. And then I've also used the Faber-Castell Polychromos, and they're really soft. They're an oil-based pencil. A lot of people are familiar with Prismacolor colored pencils, which is a wax-based, very premium brand. So these tend to have more filler and less like pigment in them, but they're still really strong colors coming out. So they're harder than the Prismacolor or the Faber-Castells or the Derwent, but I'm getting really good results. So yes, I mean, there's always a bit of a trade-off. So if you're like, oh, but it's not exactly like using the the more expensive things. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you do often get what you pay for. So the quality is not going to be exactly the same, but you can get some very, very awesome results. Very similar. I mean, there are a few things that you kind of have to deal with as far as like the watercolor kind of lifting up. But that's looking really, really interesting, really cool. Just just kind of going in and darkening up. Maybe I want to come in with some of this aqua green and blend in and work in. So basically, what I'm saying is that don't let not having the best quality materials hold you back, because even if you're using something like Crayola, you can get some amazing results and do some really cool things with it. And especially if you're just kind of starting out. So too often people are like, oh, well, I can't do that because I don't have the Prismacolor or the Derwents or the Faber-Castell, or I don't have this or that. And it's like, well, just grab some Crayola, grab some other brands that just allow you to explore and experiment. And like I said, oftentimes it's like you're less attached to the results because it's, you're the less expensive the materials are, probably the more likely you're going to be like, oh, it's okay that it didn't turn out. So I'm not going to do like a full piece that I'm going to sign or anything like that, but I just wanted to show you, looking at this looks very similar to something I would do with my other materials. So yeah, I mean, it's amazing. These are just Crayola, inexpensive, oftentimes, thinking of it as the child's material. All right, so just diving in with some what some people would just say cheap, I would say inexpensive. I mean, it's decent quality for the price. And like I was saying, that when you aren't when you haven't invested a lot of money in things, sometimes you feel more open to experimenting and trying and playing around, and you're less attached to the results, because then you're like, oh, well, it's like you might feel like, oh yeah, I wasted my time or I wasted the materials, but then it's like, oh, I didn't waste a whole lot. It wasn't very expensive. I do find that too often with the high quality materials, people feel like, oh, I paid a lot of money for that, I'm only going to use that for very special things. And what tends to happen is it tends to sit in your studio, because you feel like every time you think about maybe using them, you're like, is this special enough? Is this something I want to waste my materials on if I mess up? I never look at messing up and having things go in a different direction, or even being something where I'm like, yeah, that's going to go in a drawer or a box. And I never look at that as wasting, because I'm learning the materials. I'm learning how to use them. I'm learning what's working and what's not working. And so yeah, a lot of times I will use a lower quality material like while as I figure stuff out. And then if I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting, let me try this. So here's an example. So here lately, like I said, I've been doing these daily paintings with the Crayola watercolors. And it's just to, do it every day and not have to worry about materials. And it's quick, easy setup. I can basically be painting within a couple minutes of sitting down. But I then have taken some of the ideas that I've been exploring and trying them out with some of the higher quality materials that I have. And what's interesting though is that, sometimes the higher quality materials behaves a little bit differently. It's I still have to like figure out some things, and sometimes the colors are very different. So it's a matter of mixing colors and trying to get certain things like that's just right there in the Crayola. I don't have to mix anything. It's just I can use it straight out of the palette, and it's exactly what I need. So yeah, it's been interesting to kind of to take some of these ideas that I've been doing with the Crayola paint and trying to translate them into ideas, into artwork that can hang on a wall with some of the more expensive, higher quality. And it's, yeah, I'm more satisfied with what I can do with the Crayola than I am with the higher quality. And it's just, again, I'm trying to, every material has its limitations. Every material has its idiosyncrasies, things that you have to figure out, things that you have to get comfortable with. So yeah. So anyway, so the whole thing, this whole Mixed Media Monday today was just to like say, hey, look, don't wait around until you've got that premium set of materials. If you've got some kids materials lying around, some inexpensive materials lying around, use them, because the best art materials are the ones that you're actually going to use. And if you're going to buy premium stuff and just sit it on a shelf and be like, I'll use that one day whenever I have that really special thing I want to do with it, you're never going to use it. So yeah, so don't be afraid. And especially if money's an issue, if you have to worry about a budget, these budget friendly materials can be a perfect solution for you to create, to explore your creativity. So don't be afraid of that. All right. So anyway, I hope you got something out of it. I hope you appreciate just sort of like using these materials, and I hope you look at the kids materials in a different light now. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me. And remember, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, pop them into the comments and I will try to respond to them. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me once again. And as always, happy creating.